back to the Daily Poem here on the Close Reads Podcast Network. I'm David Kern. Today's poem is by Emily Dickinson, who lived from 1830 to 1886. She was, of course, a Massachusetts poet and one of the most famous and well-remembered poets of American letters. But before I read this Dickinson poem, I want to remind you about our poetry memorization contest for our younger listeners. Don't forget that you or your student, if you are an adult, can memorize at least 8 lines of J.R.R. Tolkien's poetry, recite it, and then take a video of a recitation of those lines and post it on social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter with the hashtag DailyPoem. And we will choose winners for each of the different age groups, and we'll have some surprises that we will be giving to the winners, and we'll even play the winning recitations here on the podcast. Those are due by Valentine's Day, by February 14th. And like I said when we announced it, that's just a random day. There's no real reason that we chose that day, except that it's one that people will remember. So don't forget about that. The hashtag again is Daily Poem. And again, it's at least 8 lines of J.R.R. Tolkien's poetry. Today's poem is called There's a Certain Slant of Light, and it is a great poem for winter. I know many of you across the United States are snowed in, and February is the coldest month of the year for many of you. So this poem is for those of you who are snowed in and freezing. I don't think it'll help. Here's how it goes. There's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it anything. 'Tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. Donald Thackeray once said that this is one of those poems which are experienced but never completely understood. And he wrote that in an essay called Emily Dickinson's Approach to Poetry, which is from 1954. He notes that at first, most readers are just perplexed by this poem. But he also notes that there is a sort of unity and a cohesion to the various images in this poem. He calls it consistency and appropriateness. He notes that, quote, the slant indicates that the light is refracted, so that one may see the beam or ray itself and not just an illuminated surface. The slant is explained by afternoons. Sunset is near, for winter afternoons are short. The terms winter and afternoon both are suggestive of the end of life. End quote. I'm always intrigued by the specificity of Emily Dickinson's work, not just that she is drawing attention to a specific sort of theme or image or idea, but that she'll say that there are specific things going on here. So, for example, she's saying there's a certain slant of light. And of course, that word certain suggests many things, right? The idea of certainty, of surety, but then it also suggests specificity. Like there is a very specific slant of light that oppresses. So I always can imagine her sitting at her desk or something on a cold February day, not unlike the ones that many of you are experiencing across the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast or wherever you are. And she's sitting there at her desk, she's thinking, and she's contemplating, and she's writing, and this light comes through. And with it, there seems to come a sort of pressure. And that line about the heft of cathedral tunes is a little disorienting for me anyway. That produces a bit of dissonance in me. I think in some ways we can all understand the way sacred music can feel both inspiring and oppressive at the same time. The way there's a seriousness about it that can be quite powerful in both in freeing and in sort of oppressive ways. But then the poem shifts to the inner life. I sometimes wonder if this is a poem about anxiety. That's not a thesis I'm making. It's just a curiosity. I just wonder. Talks about internal differences where the meanings are. None may teach it anything, 'tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. Wonder if maybe she's talking about sort of a seasonal affective disorder or something like that. In 1981, a critic named Joanne Deal wrote in Dickinson and the Romantic Imagination, a comparison of Wordsworth and Dickinson. And she writes, quote, "Light, the element that bathes Wordsworth's landscapes, casts its shadow on this poem. The certain slant pierces the self, oppresses the spirit. It is not a seal of affirmation, but an, quote, imperial affliction sent us of the air," end quote. True to Wordsworthian dicta, Dickinson has responded to what she witnesses, but the light she finds is the type of doom she most fears. The internal difference filters down from heaven through the landscape into the poet, and what for Wordsworth would be a reflective if sober moment becomes the seal of despair, end quote. And this is one of the handful of Dickinson poems which I think most makes clear why she is beloved and a source of fascination, while also being a source of frustration for many readers. There's an evasiveness to it, and that evasiveness is, as Paula Bennett wrote, typical of Dickinson's more psychological poems and the source of their difficulty. She seems to be laying herself all out there. She seems to be expressing some sort of anxieties or even some sort of depressions that are brought on by the scenes that she's describing, but she doesn't very often offer much of a resolution. She doesn't offer a conclusion. She doesn't offer sometimes even a high degree of hope if you're looking for that. And so I think that there is a high degree of artistry, but sometimes that can be a frustrating thing. And so you have to sort of linger with them for a long time before the layers begin to sort of unfurl. Then her poems often become quite meaningful to people to help process their own anxieties. So she's taking the natural world that she sees and kind of filtering it through herself, like shines that light, that slant of light shines through her. And the poem is what comes out the other side, if you'll excuse a convoluted metaphor. But I'll read it one more time. So here again is "There's a Certain Slant of Light" by Emily Dickinson. There's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it anything. 'Tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. This has been The Daily Poem. Thanks for listening. Back tomorrow with another one.